Evans sat in the dimly lit living room, staring at the clock on the wall. His fingers tapped impatiently on the arm of the chair. Lillian, his wife, still wasn't home from work. He was alone with their twin daughters, Christabel and Mabel. Evans' mind raced with suspicion. For weeks, he had noticed Lillian's odd behavior. Late nights, hushed phone calls, and a distant manner. His trust in her began to fade. It's 11 o'clock and she's still not back. What kind of job keeps someone late this long? She's a married woman, he muttered. She's lying to me. The thought consumed him. A week earlier, he had taken a few strands of Christabel and Mabel's hair and sent them for a DNA test. He needed to know the truth. When the results arrived, Evans' hands shook as he opened the envelope. The words on the report filled him with anger. Not a biological match. They're not mine, Evans whispered, his voice trembling. After everything I've done for her, for them. He clenched the paper in his fist, his mind filled with darkness. Lillian betrayed me, and I'll make her pay. But he wouldn't start with her. He would start with the twins. It was a quiet night when Evans first entered the twins' room. Christabel and Mabel were asleep, their breaths even and peaceful. Evans stood by the door for a moment, his face cold. Then he stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him. "Wake up," he whispered, tapping both of them. Christabel stirred first, blinking up at him in confusion. "Daddy, what's wrong? Shut up and listen," Evans snapped, his voice low and threatening. "If either of you say a word about this, I'll make you regret it. Do you hear me?" Christabel and Mabel exchanged terrified glances, their small bodies trembling. They didn't understand why their father was acting this way, but the threat in his voice silenced them. He mistreated them, pinning them one by one to the bed. "Dad, please stop. It's painful," they cried, tears in their eyes. Evans' visits became a nightmare, repeated each night Lillian was away. Christabel and Mabel would lie awake, hoping he wouldn't come. One evening, after Evans had left their room, Christabel sat up in bed, her face streaked with tears. She looked at her sister, who was curled up at the edge of the bed, crying quietly. "We can't let this keep happening," Christabel whispered. "What can we do?" Mabel replied, her voice shaking. "He said he'd hurt us. We'll record him. We need proof. Maybe Mom will believe us if we show her." She checked through her mother's drawer the next day and found an old phone. That night, when Evans came into their room, Christabel secretly pressed record, capturing the horrifying sounds of what they went through. The twins endured days of torment before Christabel finally decided enough was enough. One morning, after Evans had gone to work, she turned to Mabel. "We're telling Mama today," she said firmly. Mabel hesitated, fear written all over her face. "What if he finds out? What if he hurts us? We can't stay silent anymore," Christabel insisted. When Lillian returned from her night shift, she found her daughters waiting for her in the living room. "Mama, we need to talk," Christabel said, her voice trembling. Lillian frowned, setting her bag down. "What is it, my babies? You look so serious." Mabel burst into tears, and Christabel held her hand tightly. "Mama, it's Daddy," Christabel began. "He's been coming into our room at night." Lillian's heart sank as she listened to her daughters recount the horrors they had endured. Tears streamed down her face as Christabel played the recordings. The muffled cries and Evan's threatening voice were undeniable. "No, no, this can't be," Lillian whispered, covering her mouth in shock. That evening, Lillian waited for Evans to come home. The moment he walked through the door, she confronted him, her face red with anger. "Evans, how could you?" she screamed, shoving the phone with the recordings into his face. Evans glanced at the screen and then at Lillian, his expression unreadable. "You want to know why I did it?" he said, his voice calm but icy. "Because they're not mine, Lillian. They aren't mine, and you know it. How could you, Lillian? You've been lying to me all this time. I've been raising another man's kids for 12 years, only to find out a few weeks ago your kids aren't mine. You used me, Lillian." Lillian froze, her anger replaced by confusion. "What are you talking about?" Evans pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his briefcase and threw it at her. "Read it. Those girls aren't mine. You lied to me, and you know it." Lillian stared at the DNA results, her hands trembling. "Evans, Please let me explain. I did it for us. I was left with no other option. For us. You lied to me, and now you say it's for us. I did everything just to make you happy, Lillian. This is how you repay me. Evans said angrily. We were going through tough times years back. You lost your job, and I just graduated from school, searching for a job. Your friend Alex offered to help. He said he would only give me a job at the bank if I did something in return. I had no other choice, so I did it. Till today, I've lived with the guilt of what I did. Please find a place in your heart to forgive me. It will never happen again, I promise. Please, Lillian pleaded, crying. That's not an excuse. You are my wife, and I trusted you with everything, but you betrayed my trust. I'm done with you. And as for Alex, I'll pay that fool a visit tonight, Evans said, dropping his bag and leaving home immediately. That night, Evans drove to visit his friend Alex. He took a pistol with him. Evans parked his car in front of Alex's luxurious house, his heart pounding. The pistol in his pocket felt heavy. Hours later, police officers arrived at Evans' home. Lillian handed over the phone and explained everything. Thank you for coming forward, Mrs. Adami, one officer said. This evidence is enough to charge him with another crime. That evening, Evans sat in his prison cell, his head bowed. A guard approached, unlocking the door. You have a visitor, the guard said. Evans looked up in surprise as Lillian stepped into the visitation room. What are you doing here? Evans asked coldly. Lillian stared at him, her eyes filled with fury. I wanted to see the face of the man who hurt my daughters. Evans' expression darkened. They're not even my daughters, Lillian. You betrayed me first. That doesn't justify what you did, Lillian shouted. They're children, Evans. Your hatred for me destroyed their lives. So what now? You're here to gloat. No, Lillian said firmly. I'm here to tell you that I'm divorcing you. I've already started the process, and you'll never see Christabel or Mabel again. I don't care. You can keep them to yourself, Evans said. 2 months later, Evans stood trial. In a packed courtroom, the judge declared him guilty. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. His wife, Lillian, sat quietly, knowing justice had been served for her daughters.